New York City. June 17, 1928. Career criminal Edwin Jerge is heading north up Broadway in a Hudson coupe. He may be driving alone, or a woman dressed in pink may be at the wheel. Initial reports support the latter, later it will be the former. What is known for certain is that the car belongs to a showgirl friend of his named Doris Sheeran, and when he left from Brooklyn, he was alone. He is on his way to pick up Sheeran. He's supposed to meet her on the corner of Broadway and 51st at 3 p.m. But, due to traffic, is running late. At 46 years of age, Jerge is old enough to remember when the only modes of transportation along the Great White Way were horse-drawn. Originally from the upstate city of Buffalo, Jerge, the black sheep of an otherwise good family, is a lifelong criminal. He was arrested for the first time in 1902 on a minor charge but let go. From there he evolved into an adept pickpocket. He eventually ended up on Chicago's South Side, where he married and became a father. An article described him as a family man, or as close to one as a career criminal could be. When not plying his trade, or serving time, he was happy to spend his leisure hours at home or taking his daughter to a White Sox game. Supposedly he had friends in high places in the police department and political scene. At this time he was known around the country as Chicago Eddie Mac. Jerge garnered much notoriety for orchestrating the robbery of the Washington Park National Bank on January 27, 1916. His confederates consisted of a local bandit named Alex Brody and 3 New York City gunmen. Benjamin Fine, aka Pinky Levine, and 2 brothers, Harry and Charles Kramer, known throughout the underworld as Little Polly and Big Polly, respectively. The latter bragged that he was close friends with Harry Gyp the Blood Horowitz and the other gangsters executed for the murder of New York City gambler Herman Rosenthal. Big Polly even wore a diamond stickpin that he claimed was a gift from Horowitz. Just as the bank was opening that day, a sedan driven by Little Polly pulled up. The driver calmly lit a cigarette while the others masked up and entered the building. As his confederates each drew 2 guns and covered the employees and customers, Jerge entered the teller's cage and shoved cash into the inside pockets of his overcoat. The bottom of the pockets had been slit so the cash fell directly into the coat lining. After 4 minutes the men walked out and made their escape. The police were already searching for Jerge and his gang as they believed them responsible for a few other heists in which the bandits wore masks. When news of the robbery broke, they doubled their efforts and picked him up that afternoon. Police informed the press that Jerge, then being identified as Eddie Mac, was in custody, but they had no evidence. Detectives searched his apartment and had his phone tapped. After police left, Jerge's wife called the flat where Brody was staying. Police traced the call and raided the apartment. The couple who lived there ended up squealing and told police where they could pick up the rest of the gang. Jerge turned state's evidence and was exonerated while his cohorts drew stiff sentences. Not only did Jerge incriminate his partners, but he also shone the light on police corruption in Chicago. He described how some on the force worked in tandem with the criminals, including the bank job he and his gang were arrested for. He also described one instance where 2 detectives hired him and a few other pickpockets to work Chicago's 1915 auto show. The detectives received 20% of the take. In the end, nearly 24 Chicago officers were outed. After double-crossing his pals and corrupt police associates, life in gangland wasn't safe for Jerge. In an exposé that his wife wrote the following summer, she described how they were living in constant fear from both members of the underworld and friends of the cops that her husband had blown the whistle on. In a supposed attempt to go straight, Jerge moved to Detroit and got a job at a Ford plant. Allegedly, Henry Ford himself offered him employment after reading of his predicament. How long the job lasted is unknown, but he returned to his hometown of Buffalo by the end of the decade. In 1919 he was implicated in the theft of $10,000 worth of liquor from a warehouse but jumped bail. In August of 1920 he was arrested for orchestrating the robbery of a tailor shop. He pleaded guilty to the tailor shop robbery and ended up doing 2 years in prison. He was released in November of 1922. About a year later, his bank-robbing confederates were paroled from prison in Chicago. The New Yorkers returned east and became involved in bootlegging. On November 30, 1923, the auto they were driving was hit by a train. Benny Fine, aka Pinky Levine, was killed and Charles Big Polly Kramer was wounded. Also seriously hurt was another Lower East Side hoodlum named Little A.B. Beckerman. The mid-20s are sketchy. Reports have Jerge serving time at the Atlanta Penitentiary for robbing a Newark, New Jersey post office of money orders, but there currently isn't a record for him. What is known is that by 1928 he was living in Brooklyn with another ex-con. It is believed that he has moved into both bootlegging and, more importantly, narcotics. Reports will surface that he made numerous trips to Europe to buy drugs. Other accounts will say that, posing as a government agent, he shook down other dealers for bribes. One of those that he had supposedly extorted just a few days previously was a small-time drug dealer named Samuel Weissman, known in the underworld as Kitty the Horse, and those who he worked for learned the truth about Jerge. For now, as he travels up Broadway that Sunday afternoon, it appears that Jerge is only dealing in pleasure. After picking up Miss Sheeran, they are planning for a leisurely drive. As the Hudson approached Herald Square, traffic begins to build up. He is already 9 minutes late when a red light forces him to stop at 36th Street. Traffic is such that cars are locked in and probably won't be going anywhere too soon. Jerge sits idling while the crosstown traffic passes through the intersection. In the sea of cars there is a blue Chrysler sedan that goes through and pulls up to the curb between Broadway and 6th Avenue. A man jumps out and hurries to the Hudson coupe. Drawing a handgun, he fires through the window at Jerge. As the wounded gangster slouches over, the gunman pulls the door open, steps onto the running board and sends a few more bullets into the wounded gangster. His job complete, the gunman heads back to his car. A pedestrian from a nearby restaurant comes out to confront him but is waved off with a threat. As the killer is whisked away, a woman dressed in pink flees from the scene. A few witnesses will say that she got out of the car, others that she was a passerby. Whatever the truth, a cab driver peeks into the car and sees the bloody mess that is Jerge. He's been hit a couple of times in the neck and a shot to the back has passed through his stomach. Climbing behind the wheel, the taxi driver rushes Jerge to the hospital where he dies during surgery. Initially, it was believed that Jerge was killed for double-crossing his bank-robbing Confederates back in 1916. But as authorities dug a little deeper, they learned of his involvement with drugs. Kitty the Horse was picked up but had an alibi. There was a break in the case when detectives traced the blue Chrysler used by the killers back to an auto rental agency owned by a guy named Max Kasoff. He was brought in for questioning. Although he admitted to renting the car and supposedly told cops who rented it, nothing was done. Detectives may have been on the right track with Kasoff, however, because in addition to renting cars, he was also a small-time drug dealer. And like Jerge, he too was taken out permanently. In the coming years, Kasoff encroached on territory controlled by Charles Lucky Luciano. Finally, the drug kingpin tired of the competition and a contract was given to the Brooklyn gang of executioners known as Murder Incorporated. On Thursday, March 8, 1934, Kasoff left for work but never made it. His car was found but he disappeared. Hoping to cash in on the hit, the assassins took Kasoff to Long Island and told him he was being kidnapped and asked who to contact for the ransom. A call was placed to a friend of Kasoff and a demand was made for $5,000. According to the authors of Murder Incorporated, the Brownsville killers received $2,700 and a plea for more time. Kasoff was told that he was going to be released. He was blindfolded and taken to a field. The hitmen told him to take 100 steps before removing his blindfold. As the small-time drug dealer started to comply, he was gunned down. In the end, Jerge's murder was never solved. Perhaps it was corruption or incompetence or a combination of both. Either way, several detectives on the narcotics squad were demoted. Being that he was executed in heavy traffic on a Sunday afternoon in Herald Square, Jerge's murder was considered one of the most brazen killings of the Prohibition era. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like and consider subscribing to the channel.